Gators Breakdown episode 87 is ready to go, and what a busy Wednesday it was. Feleipe Franks is named starting quarterback versus Michigan. Jordan Scarlett suspended versus Michigan. And hopefully we'll have on Steve Deace of the Michigan podcast to discuss the Michigan side for us. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Co-host tonight, Bill Sykes. You can find Bill on Twitter at RealBSykes. And Will Miles, who joins me every Wednesday. You can find Will on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. Guys, this was something I don't think we expected with Jordan Scarlett. And we weren't sure if we'd get a quarterback announced today, but we did.
Yeah, man, what a day this has been. I was kind of glad we got the Franks news just for my own personal sanity. I don't know. Without that, I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah, it's McElwain's been torturing us, going back and forth with the three-headed monster there. So it's nice to hear that announcement, but certainly disappointing to hear the news about Scarlett, and I'm sure we'll get more into that as we go.
Yeah, for sure. And with the Franks news, I think we kind of knew some inklings that it may come out that he would be the starter, but we weren't sure when McElwain would announce if he would do it today since there was a media availability, or if he would just wait until Saturday and keep Michigan wondering. But before we dive in here, remember you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Just search on those sites or get the links by following Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook at Gators Breakdown. Please, when you're on iTunes, rate and review the show. Let everybody know what they're getting with Gators Breakdown. So, Bill, I'll start with you. Feleipe Franks named starting quarterback. Did it surprise you Jim McElwain went ahead and announced it? Did you think it had anything to do with the suspension of Jordan Scarlett being announced, that this would make the fan base feel a little better? And just overall thoughts, we now know this is the guy who's going to take the snap under center when Florida is in Dallas versus Michigan.
Well, I mean, I guess maybe it had a little to do with this, but, there was a cryptic tweet issued on Twitter by Frank's girlfriend the other day indicating it was something. We kind of all took it as fans that she was kind of hinting that he was going to be the starter, talking about how proud she was. So I don't think that he called the team together, certainly, and announced this like today. I think it came out today. I think it's kind of a coincidence. It just seems like kind of a small potatoes thing to do as far as offsetting bad news. I certainly don't think it does neutralize that in our own minds, but it is good news all the same. And it's the narrative we wanted. The guy that was a 7,380-yard passer in high school and who, threw for 87 touchdowns, that was a high 4-star signee for McElwain, has now emerged as the guy that has taken the job into fall camp. And this is what we wanted to see. We were happy that Zaire came in as a depth piece, but we all knew that if the guy that Mac handpicked couldn't win the job, that could be taken as a problem, but now we don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, and that's true. And I think this was the way the fan base wanted this to happen. This is Luke Del Rio. I'm sorry, after last year, fans were over it. Malik Zaire came in the summertime, and I thought it was a sign that if he could come right in and take the job right away from Feleipe Franks, who's already been here, that it may not have been a good sign where Feleipe Franks is. Now it looks like he's developed. Looks like these last 2 springs have done him some good. This camp has done him some good. So, Will, do you think it's the right move? I know you had a nice write up about Luke Del Rio not too long ago, where if he was the choice, it may not be so bad. But in the grand scheme of things, is this the right move for Jim McElwain and Feleipe Franks?
Yeah, I think it is. I think, the point was that McElwain needed to give Del Rio a shot because of his track record in high school. And, he's given all these guys an equal shot, and Franks comes out winning the job. And I think, the key to come out of this season is really knowing what you have at the quarterback position. You got Matt Corral coming in next year, and one of the things, at some point, you got to lay the groundwork for who's going to be the guy to lead you going forward. And I wrote something a while back about the defense probably taking a step back this year, and this is sort of a rebuilding year for Florida, particularly with some of the recruiting classes that maybe haven't been quite as highly ranked as Florida's used to getting. So this I think is a bit of a transition year anyway. The good news is the East is pretty weak, so Florida's got an opportunity to compete. But with this being more of a transition year, I think you put Franks in there, you see what he can do. And, if it turns out that he's fantastic, then obviously you ride him. And if he struggles, you've got two experienced guys behind him to bring in.
Is there one aspect you think Feleipe Franks is why he got this job? Is it more than just probably the big playability? Do we think he has come along enough to where there were some early in spring, first couple of weeks of spring, he's having trouble hitting intermediate throws, some corner routes into the end zone, and then when kind of the end of spring practice, those were kind of alleviated a little bit. And then we come in the fall camp in the open portions of practice. That's all we get to see. It looked like he was more consistent hitting those throws. And, you read some insider practice reports, and he's hitting throws over the middle. He's hitting those corner routes that he was having trouble with. He's hitting passes that he had trouble with in the spring. So it looks like he maybe has taken the steps. So right now, honestly, we think we know he has the physical abilities. Right now, I just think it may just be all mental, and he really just needs the experience.
Yeah, and I think Franks can be a zone buster with his arm. I think what we saw last year is Del Rio, when there were blitzes, he actually usually made the correct read, made the throw in the right direction. When there was zone, he struggled both with his pre-snap read, but then he also struggled getting the ball in there. So, if you look at the physical ability of the guys there, there's clearly no difference between Franks and Del Rio. Franks is a better player from a physical standpoint. And if he's starting to catch up mentally, even if he's not quite where Del Rio is, if he can get him in the correct play most of the time, or maybe even make a mistake but get away with it because of his arm strength, I think that's really sort of where McElwain's probably headed with this.
Yeah, and as much trouble as there is surrounding this Michigan name from a personnel standpoint at this point, that could come into play because Michigan may move to more zone looks this weekend as they try to protect their young DBs, just depending on what they want to get accomplished and what they feel they have there. So if Franks can excel in that part of the game, it could be big this weekend. And they're going to need some help now.
There we go. So, Feleipe Franks, you're a starter, but you know what? You're missing your number one receiver. You're missing your number one running back as of today. Jordan Scarlett is suspended. Also, Rick Wells, it was announced, more to do with the credit card, student credit card issue where, some players charged some things they weren't supposed to, tried to sell them, and reported as stolen. We thought it was over with, but Jordan Scarlett, Rick Wells was announced today that those guys are involved. And guys, I think we thought Jordan Scarlett would have a big, big part in this game. I didn't necessarily think he'd go crazy in the rushing yards, but we like his toughness, his ability to break tackles, make some yards after first contact. And now you may not have that. You get a little bit of that in LaMichael Pirine. But now with, Scarlett going down, Pirine is your most experienced back, and I think we're excited to see what he can do. But Jordan Scarlett was a guy we were banking on to take a majority of these running back carries in this first game.
Yeah, and he's a guy that really I was counting on to help the offensive line. They're obviously going to have their hands full because of Michigan's talent. But as I've said all offseason, this offensive line, they're young. They are still young. Yes, there's 4 starters back, but they are still maturing. They're still not by any means at the height of their potential as a unit or as individuals yet. And he was a guy that I was counting on as these guys maybe do break free, penetrate the backfield, maybe put a hand on him in the backfield or at the line of scrimmage or 1-yard pass, that he's a guy that just like I believe he led the SEC in broken tackles last year. He can help them out by churning out those yards after contact to get those tough first downs and be a difference maker in the game. And that's not to say that LaMichael Pirine can't add some of that, but it's just naive to think that he's just going to step right in and carry that torch at the same level. I just don't see that yet.
And Steve Deace joins us here from the Michigan Podcast. We'll go ahead and get your thoughts on Jordan Scarlett, and then we'll bring Steve in here.
Yeah, so I think the key with Scarlett and with Callaway, and this is really sort of where I've been coming from with these guys the whole way through, is that they have it's kind of like Steph Curry in basketball where there's a gravitational force associated with those guys. You have to pay attention to them. And when you look at the tape last year, defenses committed 2 guys to Callaway, and defenses had to respect the fact that Scarlett was really a weapon on offense, and that was going to be the way it was this year. I don't know that you have to commit that same attention to Pirine. Maybe you do, but I don't know that you have to. And so, in my mind, that's sort of the effect here is that, just sort of the fact that you can now take one more guy out by double teaming him rather than necessarily having to focus your energy directly on Scarlett.
Yeah, there we go. All right, Steve, you there? You got us here?
I have you guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Notice you don't have headphones on, so if I hear echo or whatever, sometimes we'll get that. I'll ask you to put some headphones on if you got them. But right now it seems to be good. So. So what was your reaction, Steve, for the news came out today? Jordan Scarlett, that's the first news that came out today, that Jordan Scarlett would be suspended versus Michigan. What was your thoughts about him coming into this game, and what does it mean now for Michigan?
Well, I mean, I thought he was one of the best running backs in the SEC down the stretch last season. You take away him and Antonio Callaway, and I mean, these are the two most, I don't have to tell you guys this, you're the two most proven weapons on the Florida team, and so I think this is, I would be concerned if I were a Florida fan, again, not for me to lecture you guys as Florida fans, but when you have 10 suspensions in the course of a training camp, I've never seen anything like that. There's been like a Baylor situation. I mean, a systemic moral breakdown on campus. You know what I'm saying? Something, which unfortunately we've seen too much of in recent years. But this is, I would be really concerned. I think when you were on my show this week, Dave, I drew an analogy to Notre Dame last year when one of their senior leaders in the secondary, where they were going to be really young. And they had one senior leader back in the secondary, and right after training camp, he decides to go let off some steam with some young guys. They get busted, pulled over. I think it's a DUI and weed, if I remember right. And that just sort of set the wrong tone for Notre Dame early in the year, because you need those guys. When you don't have a proven quarterback, Jordan Scarlett and Antonio Callaway are your leaders because they perform on the field. They've done it on the field in big-time games. And so when those guys aren't setting the proper example, well, that's how you end up with 10 suspensions because, a lot of guys are following them down the wrong path. And so I'd be much more concerned about that. I think that dovetails into the quarterback situation. You evaluate Feleipe Franks for an entire year, and decide that let's go bring in a guy who's played really one meaningful game in his life where there was film on him. I don't count the Music City Bowl. He had never played at all. LSU had no idea what they were looking at in that game. And you go to the Texas game, yeah, you lit them up, but that was a Texas defense. They gave up over 30 points in 8 of their 12 games. It was the worst defense statistically in the entire history of their program. The next week after he lights up Texas, he goes down to Virginia, and they're losing the game when he gets hurt. And this is where Deshaun Kaiser's star is born. He comes off the bench and throws that pass to Will Fuller and leads them to victory. And that's it. That's the body of work for Malik Zaire. So this idea you're going to bring him in after you spend a year recruiting one of the top prep quarterbacks in the country, grooming him, I have no idea what message that sends. And then he doesn't get the job on top of that. So, Jim McElwain's done a tremendous job winning SEC East. Granted, the division's been down, but winning the SEC East 2 years in a row. But if I were a Florida fan right now, I'd be wondering, what's the direction of my program right now?
Okay, wait, let's take a timeout here. And with all due respect, I think it's a little bit of a stretch to make a comparison between the rape culture of Baylor and what's going on at Florida right now because –
I wasn't making a comparison.
Well, you kind of did. I mean – it is a systemic. I don't know. And I think to be fair, yeah, there's a lot of kids involved with this incident right now or young adults. And I'm not by any means condoning it. And yeah, anytime you've got a law breaking issue, I would call it a moral failure. But this is an issue of, I guess it was a type of theft and a fraud that was committed here. And some players may still be revealed to be involved that haven't been revealed yet. But it's just still, I mean, I don't know. Making a mistake in that regard, doing something that it's morally wrong. It just, I don't think we can draw the conclusion yet that there is a systemic issue. Now, you might be right in the long term. Maybe we do get down the road a little bit and find out that there is something going on. But I just think that's premature because even though there are a lot of players here, it's still one big incident.
I think what he was saying, Bill, is that that's the only time you do see when this many players suspended at one time is if something like that goes on. I don't think it was.
If I didn't make that clear, my apologies. Yeah,
no, it's okay. I
wasn't trying to draw moral equivalency there at all. So that's not what I was saying. Is how odd this particular situation is without a systemic moral failure like which we saw on campus.
That's what I was saying. Yeah, I didn't mean to misinterpret your statement there by any means.
All righty. So we'll start. Will, you want to jump in and start with some questions for Michigan and this Florida matchup?
Yeah, I guess one of the questions that I have is Wilton Spate. I've gone back, I've looked at his stats, I've looked at his tape. It seems like he actually had a pretty good year last year, and I'm curious as to Whether Michigan is as comfortable with Spate as I am. I mean, I think he's a pretty good player, but it doesn't seem like he gets the kind of respect that maybe some of the other players in the Big Ten get. So I'm curious as to your analysis of Wilton Spate and what we should expect to see come Saturday.
That's a really good observation, because in some respects, it's similar to what David and I talked about on Michigan podcast this week, where Andy Staples from Sports Illustrated, who's a Florida grad, played on one of your national championship teams, a walk-on, makes this analogy with your coach, Jim McElwain, that people are happy with the record, but it just doesn't look, to Florida fans, in his mind, it doesn't look the way it's supposed to look with those high-powered offenses we saw under Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer. And I think Wilton Spate plays into that. There's this notion it's Jim Harbaugh, 4 or 5-star recruits at quarterback, guys that can leave early for the NFL that everybody wants. Well, Wilton Spate wasn't that guy. Wilton Spate's a holdover of the previous regime. There was a lot of talk, if you guys remember the clip that HBO did on the Harbaugh hire a couple of years ago when he first came into camp. And, I mean, Wilton Spate learned a whole new vocabulary courtesy of Jim Harbaugh in those first few spring practices. There was talk that he'd never really play meaningful football. And then he's the starter, but he's a holdover from the old regime. And it's just fans. I think a lot of fans are like, Brandon Peters is our Feleipe Franks. Very highly recruited quarterback who's a redshirt freshman. He was much better in the spring game. And I think fans just he looks more like what a Harbaugh quarterback is supposed to look like. But Spate has something that Harbaugh loves in his quarterbacks, and he's got, pardon the pun, spite. He's just got some urine and vinegar in him. He's just a son of a gun. And Harbaugh will take the son of a gun over the guy that looks pretty throwing the football any day of the week. And that's why Wilton Spate's the starting quarterback, because while Brandon Peters may have more of the physical attributes that Harbaugh had as a player and he's looking for, Spate has those intangibles and has that dog in him that Harbaugh looks first and foremost in his quarterback. And his stats last year were good. He led the Big Ten in third down passing efficiency. What really changed the season was the game at Iowa. The whole offense did not have a good game, and then he got hurt at the end. But as bad as he played, he put the ball on the money, 2 passes there that were both dropped, one for a touchdown by Jehu Chesson, one for a first down by Amara Darboh. If they make either one of those catches, Michigan could very well have been in the playoff last year, okay? And we have a whole different complexion to the season. And then you look at Ohio State, guys, he came back 2 weeks later and played in a game that if it wasn't that much at stake, he would not have played. I mean, that shoulder was bad. And then the first half against Florida State, I mean, Florida State's offense or defensive stunts just confounded Michigan. And he just essentially had to sit there and go DeAndre Francois, take hits and pot shots before they adjusted. But beyond those moments, the first 8 games of the year, he was playing as well as any quarterback in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it seemed like you guys were putting up high numbers every week, it seemed, for the first half of the season there. So I do remember that. So how big of a weapon can running back Chris Evans be? I mean, we saw him in the spotlight versus Florida State last season in the Orange Bowl where he really impressed. Is that what we can expect to see Saturday? And how about the running backs behind him? And is there a way where they still move him around like what we saw him moved around last year?
Yeah, I think Jim is still looking for his Frank Gore, looking for his bell cow. Chris Evans averaged over 7 yards a carry last year, but except for the second half against Florida State when he lit them up, all of those were games that, big gains he had early in the year, primarily against scrub teams like Hawaii and others that they dominated, okay? He's a tremendously gifted back, very explosive, one of the most explosive guys on the roster. They say he's changed his body type. We'll find out Saturday because he did not look like a young man you give the ball 20 times to in the belly and have him carry a football team. He looked like a guy that was, and I'm not making a comparison, just sort of a play type, a 5-tool kind of player like a Reggie Bush, a 10 or 15 carry guy, 5 or 6 passes, 2 or 3 end arounds, return kicks. And at the end of the game, you found a way to get him the ball 20 to 25 times. But I didn't think he had the body type that could put up with that. Ty Isaac was a huge recruit a couple of years ago, 5-star kid that transferred in from USC. He does have the physical frame you're looking for, just hasn't been able to put it all together. He kind of has that California, yeah, whatever, dude, kind of vibe, and Harbaugh freaking hates that. Okay, now they're saying that this offseason, the lights come on, but let's face it, every coach in America says that about every senior. The lights come on, they're a senior. We'll see again on Saturday. Behind them, they got a kid named Karan Higdon, who's kind of a combination of Isaac and Evans, and that he's got a little bit of Isaac's frame and a little bit of Evans' explosiveness. He's just not quite been able to find his niche. And then behind them was a guy that at one point, 2 years ago, Rivals.com ranked the #1 running back in the country in Kareem Walker. He took a red shirt last year to get academically more acclimated to the university. I think you'll see him return kicks, but I think they're still looking to see who's that 3rd and 3 guy going to be to move a pile like Devion Smith did the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Chris Evans. I mean, I kind of watched his style, and he doesn't look like you said, a traditional 20 carry back. He's just a different body style. He's almost a tweener. If he was maybe an inch taller between a running back and a receiver in his build. And he really, the only time he got more than 10 carries last year was against Rutgers, where he did rip off 11 runs for 153 yards. But he does look to me as more of a 7 to 10 touch guy game. And it's going to be interesting to see, especially against Florida, when, Florida is putting hats on him, how he does hold up in the fourth quarter. Does he become a force for them, or does he become a liability later in the game?
Chris Evans, he's very explosive, but he also rocks the best high top fade in all of college football. Dude, kid in play wears number 12 for the Michigan Wolverines. All right.
So Michigan really struggled in short yardage opportunities last year, but they were really, really good inside the red zone. And so I'm curious, was that just Spate? Or, the fullback Khalid Hill had a ton of touchdowns last year. I'm curious as to what you attribute the success in the red zone, especially considering some of the offensive line struggles on short yardage.
That's a really good observation you make there in that dichotomy that a lot of people haven't picked up on. I think what you saw in the red zone, and you've seen it under Harbaugh since he took over, I think a lot of it is his scheming, his ability to create matchups, recognize mismatches in short spaces. That's the NFL game, right? And he has brought that to the Michigan Wolverines, and that compensated for the lack of technique and strength. They added a couple of positions in the offensive line, but you can't game plan around that on 3rd and 2. That's really that's the last step, guys, the Michigan program has to take. If you go back to the infamous game against Sparty, which I don't even want to recall, 2 years ago on the punt drop, that only happens because they can't run out the clock. They couldn't run out the clock against Iowa. They couldn't run out the clock against Florida State. They couldn't run out the clock against Ohio State. And that's how you lose 3 games at the end of the year by a combined 5 points. That's the next step to take. That's what Michigan fans are waiting to see, is when we're playing that NFL-style 4-minute offense, running out the clock to win a football game. Can they do it? Now, I think they'll be physically more gifted. Several of the guys he inherited the offensive line, like Kyle Callis and others from the previous regime, just didn't get the coaching and development they needed. And I think that's been upgraded. But what they've traded for technique and what they've traded for physicality with youngsters like Michael Onwenu and others that are pretty physically imposing individuals, they've given up in experience and cohesion. And as you well know, on the offensive line, cohesion and chemistry are usually going to trump talent and strength if indeed the tie goes, if it's a tie between the two. And so that's what we're waiting to see on Saturday. Is we think this unit's going to be physically better, but will they play well together from the outset, from the jump in week 1? And we're not going to know until we kick this thing off on Saturday afternoon.
It's interesting you say that, because you've got 2 of those linemen that were in all 13 games last year, one being Mason Cole, who's playing a new position, and then Ben Bredesen, who played in 13 games but started 8 at left guard. But if you think about that, that means there's not 2 players that played next to each other in the same positions from last year that are playing there this year. So, do you feel that Michigan's offensive line is going to be able to stand tall against Florida's pass rush and their defensive line unit, which has a lot of talent at the ends, maybe some questionable depth at the tackle? How do you see that matchup playing out?
Well, you look at Mason Cole, he's a future pro. He's been all Big Ten as a center, all Big Ten as a left tackle. They moved him back out to left tackle. They have a young man who was a big-time recruit a few years ago in Patrick Kugler, who just has taken some time. He's had some injuries, had to put some weight back on. He's just taken time to develop, but he's held off one of the top center prospects in the country, Cesar Ruiz, that they brought in from IMG Academy down by where you guys live. So he held him off even through when he was an early enrollee. So they're comfortable there. And then you mentioned Ben Bredesen, who was a top recruit they brought in last year, started as a freshman. That left side of the line last year, to Bredesen at guard and who they had at left tackle was really good. The right side of the line, not good. And that's where this is all going to determine whether they take that next step, is on that right side. Michael Onwenu, we believe, is a physical upgrade from Kyle Callis, but he doesn't have the experience Kyle Callis had. And then we're still trying to figure out who there's really, for a team that everybody talks about doesn't have a lot of starters coming back, there's really only 2 positions that we're uncertain of. Right tackle is one of the cornerback spots is the other, and there's several guys at right tackle, all very highly recruited, but except for one named Nolan Aluzio. And there's some talk, you see this with offensive linemen. Sometimes guys that weren't that highly recruited just develop faster than others. There's some talk he may actually be the starter at that spot on Saturday. We'll see.
Steve, we know the names on the defensive line, and they start with Rashawn Gary, Maurice Hurst. As far as this game goes, they are the best unit on the field, in my opinion. They lead that group. What makes them tick, and what can Florida do to neutralize them? And actually, can they?
I think this is where I think the loss of Jordan Scarlett matters a lot, because the one thing we haven't seen these guys do yet, Maurice Hurst, nobody even talks, Dave, about Chase Winovich. Pro Football Focus did a story earlier this week that said in percentage of snaps played last year to quarterback pressures, Chase Winovich was #1 in the country last season as a guy coming off the bench. So you're right. This defensive front is going to be really good. This is going to it might be more explosive than the unit they had last year, but it won't be as deep. And if you had the ability to pound away over a course of time, we've seen what Maurice Hurst can do. I think ESPN ranks him the #1 defensive tackle in next year's NFL draft. But we've seen what he can do playing 30 and 40 snaps. What happens when he plays 50, 60, and 70? Go to the national championship game last year where Alabama did a pretty good job bottling up Clemson's offense until we got past play number 90. If you look at Clemson's average yards per play 1 through play 90, compared to what they got yard per play after play 90, it was like Alabama had a completely different game. They just hit a wall. That was just too many snaps for them to play. This is where the loss of a Jordan Scarlett can hurt you, is if you have the patience, because he has a resume, sooner or later he will get his yards. So 2 yards, 3 yards, 4 yards, and make them take those hits, make them take those snaps, stay ahead of the chains, and then find out in the fourth quarter, we know what Rashawn Gary can do coming off the edge when he's fresh, but he hasn't had to carry a team yet. At least this is what I'd be thinking if I was a Florida coach, right? That's why I think the loss of a guy like Jordan Scarlett is pretty big, because that's one way you find out what their weaknesses are, is you push them to a limit that a lot of those guys have yet had to play.
Go ahead, Will. Or Bill, whoever.
No, go ahead, Will. Sorry, buddy. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, so I was going to say, with that in mind, I've certainly been critical of Florida's offensive coordinator, Doug Nussmeier, and you have certainly had the Nussmeier experience there at Michigan. And I'm curious whether you're salivating as much as I think you're salivating over going against the Nussmeier offense.
I still have all those Kirk Herbstreit tweets from the spring of 2014, the winter of 2014 in my head. Yeah, I know who Michigan's new OC is going to be. You're going to be really excited. And we all were, right? Comes in from the national champions. He's going to save us. Not so much. And, this is something that Dave and I talked about on Michigan podcast this week. Malik Zaire is like the left-handed version of Devin Gardner. They're almost carbon copies. Their talent, their ability, their physical frame. They're both elite-level students, right? Malik Zaire could have gone, played in the Ivy League. Devin Gardner graduated, got his undergrad at Michigan in 3 years. Right, so these are very elite-level students and similar type of quarterbacks. And what happened with Doug Nussmeier is he came in with Devin Gardner and tried to turn him strictly now into a West Coast offense quarterback. Number one, we didn't have the offensive line that could physically move the line of scrimmage, all right? So that hurt him, number one, right there. And number two, though, he felt like he had to make too many decisions. He was indecisive. You could almost see him playing in quicksand. And that was ultimately the undoing of the Brady Hoke regime. And that's always been my question about bringing in Malik Zaire was, okay, it's one thing to bring him in and he's had a year to get acclimated, or he was even there in the spring. We're one of the few teams that's brought in, other than, Wisconsin with Russell Wilson, that's brought in that grad transfer quarterback and had it work with Jake Rudock. But remember, Jake Rudock ran the same pro system at Iowa. He was literally just trading terminology, but it was all the same stuff he ran at Iowa is what he was going to run in Michigan. What Doug Nussmeier wants to do is a lot different than what Malik Zaire wanted to do or could do. So I'm not surprised necessarily to see Feleipe Franks was named the starter today. And I think that's actually, if you're looking for any good news right now as a Florida fan, I think that's the best case scenario, given where you're at right now, is to go with the guy that you've invested a year in. Nussmeier knows the strengths. Have a separate package for Malik Zaire. And it's not like your typical Wildcat, because we do know this guy can throw the football, so defenses have to respect that. Plus, it's the whole thing of one guy's a righty, one guy's a lefty, and it's not the same as trying to set the edge. Michigan likes to do a lot of pre-snap movement at the line of scrimmage on defense. Maybe you catch them out of formation and gash them for a play or two. So there's not a lot of good news right now to tell you guys that as Florida fans, but that's probably your best case scenario at quarterback right now.
Well, I mean, you know, I don't want to get that critical about that bringing Malik Zaire in. I mean, you know, they were hurting for depth. They had brought in a previous grad transfer with Luke Del Rio, and they weren't feeling really warm and fuzzy about him. And I'm with you that the grad transfer thing is a gamble at best, because those guys are transferring for a reason usually. But it has worked out in the past, as you've mentioned. So I applaud McElwain for going out and looking for a depth piece. Our concern was if, and you kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, if Zaire had come in and showed up and a week later he's the starter of the guy that was both highly rated and handpicked by McElwain. Well, now that's probably representative of an issue there, but it didn't happen. And so I think there's good news to be found, number one, in the fact that Franks has won the job, but there's also good news that you might have a depth piece that offers a wrinkle package in Zaire. I think they've got a couple of quarterbacks that can do damage in at least situations. We just want to see Franks as the guy, and I think we're going to see that.
You know, there's so much youth to be on the field for both of these teams.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know Dave indicated to me how highly you guys think of your secondary there, despite all the freshmen on the depth chart. Michigan fans, interesting, are very high in their wide receiver group, despite the freshmen and redshirt freshmen on the depth chart. So there's going to be mistakes made on this field on Saturday. I really think the biggest matchup in the game will be the coordinators. And once we're going to be actually calling the plays, calling the schemes in a heat of battle, and the 25-second clock is going, or 40-second clock, I'm sorry, I should say, not the pros. The 40-second clock is going, figuring out how do we capitalize on those mistakes? How do we minimize those mistakes? How do we, on the day of the game when the bullets are flying, and you know, it's the old Mike Tyson line, everybody's got a plan to get punched.
Hey Steve, I had to mute you there. Sorry. The audio was choppy, really choppy. So I don't know.
We have a Big Ten filter. It filters all the propaganda out of the Big Ten here. It's
Here, I'll unmute it and see what happens.
Let's try it again.
Yeah, give me just a sec. I'll edit this out for post, but let's see.
I was overloading on the northern propaganda there, man. How are we looking there?
Well, I can't get it. You guys just extend on what was happening there, and I'll.
Yeah, I don't. Sure, coordinators matter a lot. I don't want to say they don't. I'm going to wait and see what Doug Nussmeier can do in year 3. I mean, let's not forget what Doug Nussmeier took over when he got to Florida, and I know there's a questionable track record. And let's also not forget that he's going with a guy that's going to implement some of McElwain's West Coast passing schemes here. I mean, we can talk about the idea that maybe he was going to try to convert Malik Zaire to something that he wasn't, but we didn't ever see that. And we haven't seen what their plan is for Zaire. And it could very well be that he lets him be exactly who he is. And that's a guy that can run the ball a little bit and maybe, can throw some play action, things like that. And then we got Franks, who I think is going to come in and run McElwain's system as we've seen at every school he's been in. So I'm pretty excited about it. And I'm pretty excited about the possibility that Nussmeier really makes a name for himself and becomes a head coach next year.
Yeah, let's try Steve real quick. All right, Steve, just to check.
Can you guys hear me now?
There we go.
We good?
Yeah, we're good. If you can finish your thought now. Okay.
You got to say things that are pro Gator though, or it might start going out again.
I think that you're just dealing with a lot of youth on both sides of the ball, and both teams are going to play guys that have not played a lot of meaningful snaps with one another. And I think the coordinator that does the best job of making those adjustments in the game, putting their players in the best position, number one, to minimize risk, and then number two, to take advantage of the opportunity, I think that's going to make a big difference. And you mentioned how optimistic you were to see what Doug Nussmeier could do in year 3 with a team and an offense and a unit he's built. For us as Michigan fans, this is only the second time since Lloyd Carr retired 10 years ago that we're coming back with the same head coach and the same offensive coordinator, if you count Tim Drevno, Jeff Fish were kind of co-OCs, and Drevno is still here. Same head coach, same offensive coordinator, and same defensive coordinator 2 years in a row. That's only happened once in the last decade, guys. So that tells you how much turnover we've had.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead, Dave. Sorry, buddy.
I was just wondering if Will had one more thought, but you can go ahead and jump in, and then Will can follow in after that.
No, go ahead, Will. I'm being the hog tonight.
I guess I sort of wanted to pivot away from the Florida game a little bit and look more big picture. And one of the questions that we'd asked sort of our Twitter fan base was, would Florida rather beat Florida State or win the SEC East? And I'm curious, with Ohio State, there was a discussion this morning on Mike and Mike where they were talking about how long are Michigan fans going to be patient for Harbaugh not beating Ohio State and not winning the Big Ten. And so I'm sort of curious to your answer. Would you rather win the Big Ten East or beat Ohio State? And is there anything to that? Is there restlessness in the fan base, like seemed to be indicated on Mike and Mike this morning, or is that just they're scaring up something that's not really there?
It's the latter. They're scaring up something that's not really there. I mean, this is a love affair. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, this is the prodigal son returns. I mean, he has rebuilt the brand. Now he's not the last son of Krypton, but he's pretty darn close. Okay. So if they don't beat Ohio State this year, I mean, yeah, on message boards you will, but Reddit isn't America, guys. Okay, it's just not. All right, so if this happened, if we went 3 or 4 more years in a row where he didn't beat Ohio State, then I think we'd have some of those conversations. But this is way too premature. I go back to Harbaugh's first game against Utah on a Thursday night. And Colin Cowherd and all those guys and Dave Wanstead on Fox are all saying, oh, it's going to take them 3 to 4 years to get Michigan back in the top 25. They won 10 games that year. Now we're in year 3, and it's like, oh, he hasn't beaten Urban Meyer and Nick Saban, so he's overrated. This is the media game. The only thing that gets better ratings than building up the new hotness is tearing it down. That's all a joke. I keep reading these stories from people who haven't talked to 5 Michigan fans, would be my guess. If they lose to Ohio State, is he in trouble? Are people pissed off? No, they're not. And besides, Michigan fans would rather win the Big Ten anyway if you gave them a choice. Now, if this goes on for 3 more years and they're a 9 or 10 win team for 2 or 3 more years in a row, yeah, then I think you will see some of that. But guys, we're still in the googly eyes phase here. Okay, we haven't left Niagara Falls yet. We're putting more coins in that vibrating bed, guys. We haven't even left the honeymoon yet.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm muzzling myself, man. I'm muzzling myself. Yeah, I guess. I'm just excited about this football game this week, guys, and I'm trying to still hold on to that. And just to kind of pivot back just a little bit, I'm struggling here with all these suspensions. It's just I think it looks tough. I'd like to know what you guys think, and if we're okay to do that, Dave, as far as can we make our revised predictions?
Basically, going back on our predictions, yeah, of course. It's tough to see Florida, pulling this one out now. It really is. I don't know where the team's at mentally. I mean, I'm not trying to speak for the team. I don't know where they're at mentally right now. Is the focus there? They'll be ready to play. Don't get me wrong. It's the first game of the season. It's a big game. They'll be ready to play. But has the focus been there with all the off the field issues? And that's kind of where I'm at. I don't think there's a divide in the locker room. I don't think there's putting blame on each other. I just think they maybe not have been there. Maybe the focus may not be there. I don't know if it is or not, but I just think that's a very valid question there. So, it's tough to see with you're starting a brand new quarterback, a young quarterback, Feleipe Franks. You're missing your top receiver. You're missing your top running back. And that's a tough quest to get right now. So it's very, very, very hard to, of course it's all today and it's all woe is me for Florida fans right now. And it's kind of the flavor of the moment, but it is tough to see Florida pulling this out now with just everything that's going on.
Yeah. Here's how I look at this, man. On the downside, it does feel like the world's caving in. Florida's lost. What do we got? We're out 10 players now. Between Callaway and Scarlett, you've lost 37% of your yards from scrimmage from last year and 34% of your touchdowns. That's pretty devastating. And that's in addition to everything else, the attrition that you had naturally through graduation and the draft and all these other things. So, yeah, it's just a fact of life now that Florida's going to roll into Texas with a cloud over it. It's going to roll into Texas without its best running back, its best receiver, essentially all of its depth at linebacker for the most part, at least its second-team linebackers they were counting on. They lost Marcel Harris at safety. This is tough. This is going to be a very tough call. But I would caution everybody out there that they play these games for a reason. And while we obviously know that a portion of this team wasn't focused on building the program, and I know, Will, you're kind of not big on their chances, and I'll be honest, I'm not huge on them anymore either. Anything can happen. Lamico Perine is a good running back. We believe they've got some talent at receiver. Hopefully that what they've got left there stays there. But if this offensive line takes the next step forward, if the defensive line comes out like we believe they can, and if Randy Shannon can scheme up a defense and the secondary can be what we think they are, I believe that they can at least be in this game and in position to win late. But I'm not ready to predict them to be the winner right now. So I don't want to put a score on it, but I think at this point we need to be hoping for a defensive ball game, which I did not want before. And I think we need to hope that they can make a play late to win it.
Yeah. So, Steve, I guess, the warts better than anybody on Michigan's team. How would you try to attack Michigan at this point if you were Florida, and knowing what you know about the offense and who's going to be there, and sort of just do you see any place that Florida can really make some hay against that Michigan defense?
Well, what I would try to do is I would try to emulate Florida State's game plan last year in the Orange Bowl. I would try to pound. Dalvin Cook really had like 2 runs of significance in that Orange Bowl, but his stats at the end of the game looked pretty good. All right, so 75-80% of his carries didn't really go anywhere. It's just where he killed us were the 2 or 3 that really did. All right, and so, the game plan I would have had is I'm going to pound Jordan Scarlett at that Michigan defensive front. We know those guys are really good, but I want to see them stand up to that for 4 quarters. I want to see them show me they can do it for 60 or 70 snaps and not 25 to 40. All right. Then what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to catch, it's not easy. So maybe 2 or 3 times a game. You saw Colorado was able to do it once or twice last year. Yeah, you saw Ohio State did it once in overtime. You saw Florida State do it a couple times in the Orange Bowl, and that's pretty much it the whole year. There's a couple of times Don Brown will give you an opening if you have the right call right at that time against the blitz package he's called up. And that's where I would have tried to get Antonio Callaway in space as much as possible to see some of these young DBs, see if they can make that tackle. And if not, well, you don't make a tackle, all of a sudden that guy's taking you to the house. Well, those guys are gone. So that would still be my game plan if I were Florida. And I will defer to you guys whether they have the players without those 2 guys that are capable of doing that.
It's going to take some creativity from the offense, and I thought that to begin with, but even more so now. We're going to have to see a different Doug Nussmeier calling plays than what we've seen in the past. And, we've seen it the first 6 games.
If you don't mind. Because
hold on, Steve. I'll have to mute you again and see if we can figure that out.
Yeah, listen, as much as, I think we're all kind of feeling down in the dumps about what's come out today, let's not pretend Florida doesn't have other playmakers there. Between Kadarius Toney and Hammond and Swain and Cleveland and, maybe even some of these young tight ends in the passing game. I don't know. I don't like the idea. I mean, I like the idea that Michigan fans think that Florida's only going to have a few opportunities against that defense, but that defense is largely being replaced. I mean, I know the defensive line is, I would call them verifiably maybe one of the best in the nation, but I think there's going to be opportunities there. It's just, to me, it's going to be a matter of limiting the penetration, like I tweeted earlier today, from the defensive tackles and the interior 3 of the offensive line for Florida. They're going to have to slow those guys down and give Franks time to stand up there and try to deliver some passes to the seams and get players in space. But if they can do that, they might generate a few points. And I'm not convinced Michigan runs away with things on offense. That's just me. I know I might be playing the homer here, but that's the way I see it.
All right, Steve, we'll try you again there.
One last thing I wanted to say is, listen, I'm a Michigan fan, but I'm a huge college football fan. And I like it when the top teams are really good, except when they play my favorite team. Okay. So what I'm going to say now is not as a Michigan fan, but as a college football fan. This is actually an excellent opportunity for Jim McElwain beyond this game. He can send a lot of messages. It's very clear. I agree with what David said earlier. They're not going to be flat. It's the first game of the year. You waited 9 damn months to play a game. You're going to be up for the game. But you do wonder where the focus and leadership is when the guys who are your playmakers are obviously focused on doing some other stuff off the field that jeopardize their own playing time. I think that's kind of the point that you were trying to make. If I'm Jim McElwain, anybody who has looked at me cross-eyed this offseason, I'm suspending for this game, literally. Anybody who didn't do a rep, anybody who missed study hall in July when they don't have study hall, just thought about missing a study hall. I am suspending that guy. I'm making this my Alamo. I like what he did today when he said, hey, let's face it, you're in the SEC. A lot of schools wouldn't have suspended these guys, and we all know that. He's right when he says that. All right? If I'm him, I make this my Alamo because in the grand scheme of things, it's not a conference game for Florida. It's not as important as winning the SEC East and making a dent against Florida State and whoever comes out of the West, probably Alabama again in December. I make my stand right here. If I'm Jim McElwain, man, I'm suspending everybody and their mom who missed a rep, who screwed up one time. I'm sending a message right now, and we start the season all over again next Saturday. Because whether you win, whether you lose 24-21, whether you lose 31-10, it's the same reaction. Well, they lost because they suspended all those guys. And hell, if you win it, well, you're Lou Holtz 30 years ago who suspended 6 guys and beat number 1 Oklahoma in an Orange Bowl. Okay, so if I'm McElwain, I'm using this game to make a statement right now about the rest of this season. And I'm more concerned about that than I am this particular game because I'm playing house money with this particular game now.
Yeah. All right, Steven, you're talking about making a statement. I'll go ahead and let you make yours. You said you're a Michigan fan and everything, so we know you probably lean Michigan, but what's your prediction for this game?
I thought all along that this game would be rather low scoring. I think people are underestimating your defense because of the starters lost the NFL, but forget all the injuries you had last year, so it's a situation similar to ours. You guys had to play a lot of guys last year. Jim just plays a lot of guys. So a lot of the guys that we have on both sides of the defense have played a lot of meaningful snaps. I think both offenses are limited. Florida more so by the lack of the quarterback. Michigan because of the inexperience of the playmakers. So I thought all along 24 points would probably win this football game. I think it gets a lot tougher now for Florida to get to those 24 points.
I hear you. And Steve, thanks for joining us here. And you can find Steve Deace on the Michigan Podcast. And where can they find that, Steve? And where can they find you on social media?
At Michigan Podcast on Twitter. You can follow us, Michigan Podcast, on YouTube. If you guys missed David's appearance there earlier this week, it's our latest video we have posted up on our YouTube channel, Michigan Podcast.
All right, Steve, thank you so much for joining us here on Gators Breakdown.
Thanks, guys.
All right, Steve, joining us from the Michigan Podcast. So, guys, a good breakdown of Michigan there, and he definitely knows his Wolverines. And Will, go ahead and get your reaction first. You can kind of wrap up what Steve was saying and how he thought this game may play out.
Yeah, I think that, I sort of anticipate the game's going to be a little bit higher scoring just because both defenses have the inexperience. There are going to be some breakdowns. I know, Bill, you've talked a lot about gap integrity. You shoot out of the wrong gap, and all of a sudden it's a gash. And Florida spent a lot of time, supposedly in camp, talking to the wide receivers about making downfield blocks to spring a running back when they're able to pull, when they're, instead of a 9-yard run, making it a 60-yard run because they're focused on that. So, I think there are going to be some missed assignments. I think those missed assignments are going to lead to points. And so I'm actually expecting a relatively high-scoring game. But, I think the same thing holds true is that your margin for error got a lot less today. Your margin for error shrunk when Callaway was suspended. The margin for error got even smaller today. Florida's going to have to come out and play almost a perfect game, I think, to pull this out. And the question is, do you think they have the ability to do that?
Yeah, that's how I've looked at it too. One thing I tweeted right after it is, it makes quarterback play. The quarterback play has to be good. It really does. It had to be good anyway without Callaway. I said, if you get good quarterback play, the loss of Callaway was not going to hurt you that much. But now Jordan Scarlett, leading running back, it's mentally, just where this team at, where's Feleipe Franks at, missing the number one running back. Here's the thing that really hurts the most with Scarlett. He was just practicing yesterday. He was in the game plan. He was probably going to be a big focus of this offense. At least with Callaway, you had a lot of time to game plan without him. You had time to adjust without him. Now with Scarlett, yes, you got some good depth behind him, and Malik Davis has come on as a true freshman. Michael P. Ryan, we know what he can do, but you game plan to have Jordan Scarlett in this game. I think that's where it hurts the most.
Well, and I think one of the things is, if it was just Scarlett being suspended, I wasn't necessarily expecting Florida to beat Michigan anyway, but I picked them in a column I wrote on Monday to win the SEC East, and the reason is that there really isn't a big dog in the SEC East anyway. I think Florida has probably a better chance than anybody. I think they're a pretty solid team. The thing that concerns me about all this is the rumors going around that a player ratted out Scarlett, and that now you've got some stuff going on internally, and those sorts of things can devolve pretty quickly, and that would be the thing I'd be worried about. That if you do get beat down 34-10 and people start pointing fingers, well, now that becomes more of an issue than just the loss to Michigan and can start to spiral downhill.
What say you, Bill?
Well, I'm going to withhold judgment on what's happening inside the program, and is this a problem where it is systemic? Like I tweeted out a little while ago, the media is already running with this notion that it's a systemic problem, it's a culture problem. We don't know that yet. We do know that you got a chunk of the roster that's in trouble, and they were all in on this together. I'm just hoping it was an isolated thing. But man, we're going to find out what this staff is made of, what this team is made of, and even in smaller groups, we're going to find out what this offensive line is made of this week. We're going to find out, what TJ McCoy is made of. We're throwing some of these people to the fire. I mean, to put this unit in there, as much as a running back benefits from its offensive line, that's true the other way around too. And so now the pressure is ratcheted up all the way across the board. And sure, you could say that he's playing with house money, or McElwain that is, for this week. But man, if they lose this game, the pressure for Tennessee skyrockets.
Oh yeah.
You cannot come out and lose to Tennessee if you lose to Michigan. Suspensions be damned. It just doesn't matter. So yeah, this hurts. This hurts the program. It sets things back. It takes all the attention off the wonderful strides that were made in recruiting over the offseason. So this is going to be a tough pill to swallow for all the fans right now, for everyone in the program. And it's going to be interesting to see how they respond. That said, I'm not ready to write off Florida in this game.
Not at all. Not at all.
And
that's what we got to make clear. Even though we sound down, we're not writing them off.
Yeah, I'm not picking them. If I don't bet on football. If I did, I would not bet on Florida. But then again, I don't feel real comfortable betting on Michigan. I mean, yeah, they do have a lot of talent in that football team. But game one, when you're replacing 15 to 16 starters, is a crapshoot. Because like you talked about those mistakes, it takes a couple of breakdowns, and a 14-point defensive performance turns into a 28-point defensive performance. And then when you tack on the special teams capability of Florida and some of the new athletes they've got with the speed from Malik Davis, from Kadarius Toney, I think that hope is there. Guys, listen, hope is there for this football game, and the season could be still primed for big things. But what we really need to see here is some resolution from these problems, from this whole credit card scam thing. We need to start hearing that, hey, restitution's been made, so-and-so's joining the roster again, because this could turn into a long-term problem.
Well, I think that's the thing that's the most discouraging, right, is that this is now bled into, 3 weeks later now from the initial announcements. And that's sort of, I think, where the energy gets sucked out of the fan base. And I mean, me specifically, it's like, when's the next shoe going to drop? When's the next name going to come down? And is that name going to be just as important as the one that came down today? And, without knowing that it's over, it's hard to really say anything about what's going to happen, because if it's not over, then, who knows? So, I think that to me, the uncertainty is the thing that makes me queasy, not necessarily. That was always my anticipation, is that there was certainty that the 7 players who were suspended had been dealt with. It was the Michigan game, potentially the second game as well, but that they'd be back for Tennessee. That was sort of what I thought would end up happening. Is that still the case? I just don't know.
Yeah, and there's rumors out there that maybe this isn't over, that could spread further. And
the investigation is, it is ongoing. That is confirmed, that the investigation is still going. So there's no telling, when it ends and what they find.
Ugh.
Here's another thing that kind of irks me. Jordan Scarlett talked to the media yesterday and was asked about James Robinson, and quote, "I told him everybody makes mistakes, kind of a dumb mistake. I've already been through it. It's just something you got to learn from. I told him to try to do some good things to cover all that stuff up. Everybody makes bad mistakes." This was yesterday, and he knew he was involved in this, and it just really blows my mind. It's just, I mean, man, if you knew you were involved, I mean, yes, I know you're a college kid and you probably think you can get away with this, but man, you put your teammates at a disadvantage when you know you're being put part of the game plan, and now in the back of your mind, you know you did something wrong, and this probably could come out anytime.
Yeah, and to be fair, though, whatever went down with this whole credit card thing happened a while back. So, what is he going to say, though? He's like, man,
exactly.
I'm just glad they didn't catch me when I was selling my stuff.
Yeah. And believe me, if I was in his shoes, I probably wouldn't be going up to Jim McElwain either and be like, "Hey, coach, I might have been involved with this too." So, I guess I guess you see how long you can get away with it, but it's just.
You're going to be hiding in your locker, not saying anything.
Right. It's just, man, at least
sink ships, man.
At least quit with the comments, though. Make yourself look like a saint, and then a day later, you're part of this scam as well. So.
I think the other thing we should emphasize is this is a bunch of players making individual mistakes. It's not a repeat type of thing. So, when Billy, you made the point about culture. I mean, if your kid makes the same mistake over and over and over again, okay, my kid makes that mistake. If your kid makes one mistake and all of his friends make the same mistake, that's different than if one person is making the same mistake over and over and over again. So, from a cultural standpoint, I don't know necessarily that's I don't know that holds water. It's not something where things are being swept under the rug. It doesn't appear as though this is like, multiple people have done this multiple years, things like that. It's just one incident that many people participated in. And to be honest, if we were playing Middle Tennessee State, no one would care. No. So it would be like, as long as they're back for game 2, we don't care. Yep. And it's just because this happens to be the year where we're playing Michigan where people are paying attention. So, I get it. It's disappointing for everybody. It's certainly disappointing for me. But, I don't necessarily think this is indicative of a cultural problem so much as it is just, a bunch of people did something they shouldn't have done. They got caught. And now they have to pay the consequences. And I do wonder how many players on other teams have also done this and just haven't gotten caught.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest here. They're 2-star criminals. I mean, this was a dumb scam. Okay, we need some education here and say, guys, okay, if you're going to break the law, you don't hatch a plan that makes you try to convince the authorities that all the football players had their prepaid cards stolen and that they all were taken to a single store and purchased Apple Watches. Come on, guys. Hatch a better plot, man.
Well, what was it? Chris Carter a couple years ago at the NFL Rookie Symposium. Didn't he tell the players they needed a fall guy? Like that's the problem in the plan. They didn't have a fall guy for that.
Where's Eddie P? He's the kicker.
Can you find 10 fall guys?
Blame it on the kicker, man.
Hey, maybe we can blame a win on him. Maybe he got the win.
Hey, that's the thing. This year, you don't want to give up the kicker, man. It might be the MVP this year.
Yeah, exactly. So,
the other thing I do want to go back to is I still do think Florida's the favorite for the SEC East. So, and again, Bill, I agree. This game still needs to be played, and Florida's going to show up, and they're going to be pissed off, very much like they were going to LSU last year, where
you stole yep.
LSU was challenging them, and they showed up and hit them in the mouth. And, from the offensive line standpoint, that's the most impressive the Florida offensive line looked last year was after they got challenged and their manhood got challenged going to LSU. So I can envision a scenario where they put up a pretty good fight against Michigan. Now, I think Michigan's a pretty good team, and so it might be harder to do. But even if they lose to Michigan, that doesn't diminish my enthusiasm for their ability to take the SEC East. I mean, Jacob Eason at Georgia is going to have to take a huge step forward based on what they were last year for them to be any good. The second best team in the SEC East last year was Vanderbilt. So, Tennessee is losing their starting quarterback. We don't know what they have. South Carolina was way worse on a point differential basis than their actual record. Kentucky, we've beaten 30 years in a row, and Missouri is awful. So, I look at this and the other thing is the two guys who are who are the main competitors in the East, Georgia and Tennessee, have to play Alabama. So they start with one loss on the record pretty much to start just to start the year. So, again, big picture, and I really want to make sure we emphasize this big picture. I think Florida still has, even if they were to lose the Michigan game, and even if they were to lose the Michigan game big, those goals still exist. And, presuming this is the end of it, then I'm really enthusiastic for the season. And to be honest, I kind of want to see what happens in the Michigan game, just because there's so much uncertainty on both sides. You can't be sure what's going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, and I want to go back to our last episode because, Bill, you were adamant on Florida needs to come out and establish the run and run into this Michigan defensive line and impose their will. And then Joey and I were kind of, pass first through, maybe open up the run game later through the passing game early. With the Jordan Scarlett suspension, do you change your mind on how you attack this Michigan defense? And do you think do you think the coaches? Do you think this changes the coaches' minds as well and what they think they can do?
Well, I might go away a little bit from the power blocking schemes and trying to let Scarlett spring forth after contact, because I do think that Hurst he's still a smallish defensive tackle. I believe that you might see Heggie and McCoy, or McCoy and Johnson have some success driving him off the ball. And so I don't, you still got to give it a shot. But I might focus more on the misdirection and zone plays that kind of let them overrun the play, because these guys are quick, they're aggressive, they like to slide and they like to shed blocks and move laterally down the line. And if you can key on plays where they take themselves out of the play, and like we were talking about earlier with the read option, if you can let them take themselves out of the play, that's a heck of a lot easier than forcing them out of the play. So I think the potential for that is great. I think that might include getting your slots like Tony involved, and maybe giving them some wrinkle plays where they actually are handed the ball off, maybe a reverse or jet sweeps. I don't know. I just think you got to focus a little less on running right at them and hoping to break a tackle.
The other thing is, I think it's hard for a Tiger to change his stripes, and Michigan blitzes a lot. Yeah. And so, they're going to leave there if they still do that, especially with Frank starting. You can imagine they might test him pretty early on with blitzes. And that's going to leave the secondary vulnerable to some big plays, particularly, I've mentioned a lot, Jordan Scarlett is a really good running back, but he was pretty awful in pass protection last year. And so it's possible that having Pirine in there first and second down actually turns into an advantage for Florida if he's better versed in pass protection, because the linebackers for Michigan made a lot of plays last year. And the guys who are coming in, Steve mentioned, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. Steve mentioned Chase Winovich, as one of the linebackers who really made some big plays. And they've got those linebackers. They're going to bring them on a blitz, and the running back is going to have to be stout. And so perhaps having Pirine in is actually an advantage that Florida may not have wanted to have, but now has just because of the situation. So it's interesting. But Jordan Cronkrite was in there on every passing down last year until there was some uncertainty about whether he was going to be with the program. They could not leave Scarlett in there on passing downs because he just was not picking up the pass protection. So
it was very predictable, Will, to extend on that part. A lot of people knew when Scarlett was in there that it was more than likely going to be a run play, and when the other guys were in there that they may be passing the ball.
Yeah, and that killed them, especially in the second half against Tennessee. Yeah. It just absolutely killed them. Anytime it was third and short, they knew they were giving it to Scarlett, and Tennessee came flying up.
I'm really interested to see what Florida does in some speed looks this year in the backfield, too, with Malik Davis back there. He's a guy that's kind of built a little bit like Michigan's running back Chris Evans that we were talking about, although he might grow into more of a true running back. I think he's like 5'11", 190, but this gets fast. He can fly. And so when you get him on the field with Tony and a few of these other speedsters they've got now, it's going to be interesting to see how Michigan copes with that, because I know they've got a lot of talent. They got a lot of highly recruited players, but like we've talked about, they haven't played together. They haven't had to toe the line against the University of Florida out there when they're coming full throttle and pissed off and, trying to prove people wrong. So you never know.
Yeah, that's where we're at right now. And like Will said, and it went through my head as well, maybe these players rally, and this is an LSU rally game. It's You're going there to a place that you're not expected to win. You're not in the friendly confines of the swamp, and it's a little bit better. You're in a neutral site, but people were questioning Florida if they could win this game before, and now even more now, and even us. So maybe they go prove us wrong, and I retweeted it. LaMichael P. Ryan tweeted out a few minutes ago, "Silence the doubters." So they're hearing it. Believe me, the Florida players are hearing it, and they're not going to be able to get away from it either, with this being as big as a game as it is. So maybe Florida can rally the troops and they come together and then go to Dallas and really put up a performance that we'll be proud of for these Gators. They'll be ready. Like I said, they'll be ready. Let's just hopefully the focus was there in these past couple of weeks, and they can adjust quickly from missing Jordan Scarlett.
Yeah, let's hope so, man. I'm going to be rooting them on, and I know all of Gator Nation will too, and this too shall pass.
Will, so I know you said you had your prediction for this game, and it was going towards Michigan, but you got a score prediction you want to give us?
Yeah, so before the Scarlett suspension, I had Michigan, and now I've sort of extended it a little bit. So I'm taking Michigan 34-17. The biggest reason for me to do that is just I believe in Wilton Spate. I've looked at his tape. I've looked at his statistics before the injury. The only time he really had a really horrible game was against Iowa. But, Michigan beat Colorado. Michigan just trounced Penn State early in the year last year, and those are pretty solid teams. They played 5 teams that finished in the AP top 25. They finished 3-2, but they were all close losses. The Florida State, Ohio State, and Iowa games were all 1 or 2 points. So I look at it in Michigan from a point differential standpoint, and I realize they're losing a lot of guys, but they were 19 points per game better than Florida last year. And so with all the uncertainty on both sides of the ball, I don't know that Florida made up 19 points in in the additions that they've made compared to the additions that Michigan's made. And so, to me, that's really the key is Michigan. And some of those Michigan players forced their way onto the field and got playing time in a situation where it was a pretty elite team. I mean, they wound up 10-3, but they could have very easily been 12-1, 13-0. So that's why I'm taking Michigan. I think they're a real good team. I think Florida's a solid team too. But in the common opponents they had last year were Iowa, and then Florida State. And Florida State sort of trounced Florida the last couple of years, and Florida really hasn't looked in their class. And Michigan stood toe to toe with them. So anyway, that's why I'm taking Michigan. But before the suspension, I wouldn't have been surprised for it to go either way. After the suspension, like I said, I think that really reduces the margin for error for Florida. But if Franks comes out, hits a couple big plays, and doesn't throw any interceptions, Florida certainly has a shot.
One thing about that, and one reason originally I didn't pick Michigan was because I thought Florida's defensive line would shut down the Michigan run game, and I didn't believe Spate could do it by himself without the Michigan run game. If the Michigan run game isn't there, do you still believe Spate can get the job done?
I think a lot of it will depend on how the offensive line protects him. If Michigan can't get the running game going and the Florida defensive line can get to him, then he's going to struggle just like any quarterback would. But I think the same thing can be said for Franks, right? If Florida can't get the running game going and Michigan starts putting him on his back, then he's going to struggle. And I think, it's really a question of track records. And you look at Wilton Spate's track record, and he led a really good team last year. And he's coming back, and just there's a lot more certainty for me at the quarterback position at Michigan than there is at Florida. And in most cases, the quarterback, the game goes as the quarterback goes.
Yeah. And actually, that was bleeding into our final thought here. What do we get from Feleipe Franks, guys? I know it's just a prediction. We don't really know. But what do you think Feleipe Franks throws out there on Saturday?
Oof. I think Feleipe Franks is going to have a little bit of a hard time. And I say that mainly just because of the pressure. I think he's going to be under a lot of pressure. I think he probably has some really big moments in a good way and maybe some good big moments in a bad way. And I'm just going to say he probably has a mixed bag. I'm not comfortable picking Florida to win this game at this point. But if Perine can get things going, if Perine can make that next step, then at least I think that will help Franks and make it respectable. But I would, let's just put it this way. I don't think Franks is going to have an awful outing. I think he's going to have a good outing at points, but let's not be too hard on him if the stats aren't great.
I actually think Franks is going to play pretty well. I mean, you look at him in the spring game, he's got a big arm. I think he can take advantage of some things on the Michigan defense. I do think there will be a couple of times where he gets pressured, and he does tend to sail the ball. And when you get pressured, your mechanics and all those things you've worked on when wearing the red jersey go out the window. And I think there might be a couple of backbreaking overthrows where if Michigan's playing zone, and again, if Michigan blitzes a lot, maybe they're not playing zone. But if they play zone and they got some safeties playing center field, I think there will probably be a couple of balls out there for them to get. And if they get them, then I think it'll be the kind of game I'm predicting. If they drop those balls, or if Franks is able to throw the ball out of bounds instead of throwing a ball while under pressure, then I think Florida makes it a much closer game. And the kicker is a big X factor here. If Florida can keep the game close, I know Dave, you and I talked a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week, about McElwain's record in close games. If he can keep it close, he's going to try to gain those extra edges. And with Pinheiro, I think he might be able to pull something out. But that's really predicated on Franks making all the right decisions and not throwing an interception. I think that's a lot to ask from a redshirt freshman in his first start against a top 11 team in a neutral site game.
Yeah. It is interesting to me how Michigan will attack him. Would they play zone? Will they blitz a lot? If they blitz a lot, big plays can be there. Big plays can be made. Can he read the blitz? Can he get the ball out on time? That's where you can see the big plays. If they're asking him to read a defense, they kind of sit back and they play some zone. Can you read the defense? That's one thing we haven't been able to see from Feleipe Franks. We know he's got the big arm. We know he can throw it deep. And so if the blitz is coming, maybe the receivers run by the corners. They got some young corners they got to, Michigan's working in. Maybe they can bust a big play. That's one reason I wanted Franks to play in the first place. But if they sit back in zone and make him read some defenses and make him read some coverages, then, that's what I just want to see. That's what we don't know what we're getting in Feleipe Franks. But, guys, can you imagine no Antonio Callaway, no Jordan Scarlett? We're sitting here questioning them all week. Feleipe Franks goes out, has a pretty good game, and we're talking Saturday night about the Gators winning this game. How the reputation of Feleipe Franks already is in one game if Florida comes out on top.
Oh, not just his, the program, the coaching staff, this team.
True.
You're talking about national story. And it'd be worth it just to see Jim Harbaugh's face. He might soil his khaki pants.
Well, I'll tell you, it's certainly it's going to be fun, right? Season's on the way. I feel bad talking about all this negative stuff with the season 4 days. I've been jacked for it for the last 3 months, and now all of a sudden it's on us and we got to deal with all this negative stuff. And that to me would be the best thing for the Gator fan base, at least, is that all of a sudden there's a positive to talk about with a win over Michigan. And you got, I don't really believe in momentum, but you've got players now who buy into a system and buy into the fact that they can win a game without Callaway and without Scarlett, and win a game without the guys who, are making these choices, as McElwain likes to say. So, they have the freedom to choice, and hopefully we can win the game without them. And then the players, the players who are there, are, I think at that point have proven that Florida's really back.
No, that's what I hate the most too. This is game week. We should be excited for the game. We shouldn't even be talking about stuff like this, but we are. I wish we didn't have to. I wish we could just talk strategy and what Feleipe Franks should be doing, and Jordan Scarlett and Antonio Callaway should be doing, but that's not the case. So, but look, on Saturday when 3:30 rolls around, we'll be cheering on our Gators in our orange and blue as much as anybody. So we'll get a couple of days from that now, and we'll be excited. It'll get there. Game day will come on in the morning, and we'll watch it, and we'll get excited, and we'll bide our time till 3:30.
That's right, man. Then I'll be doing film study. We'll break it down. We'll carefully be watching Jim Harbaugh to see if he eats his boogers again. We'll analyze every sideline shot.
And speaking on that, there will be a instant analysis show on Sunday. So it might just be me, it might be whoever I can bring in here from Will and Joey and Bill here. Plan on doing it by myself, but if these guys want to join, they are more than welcome to. So we'll figure all that out. So we'll have instant analysis on Sunday, normal Gators breakdown on Monday, and then Will and I also on next Wednesday night previewing Northern Colorado, but not doing too much previewing of Northern Colorado because there really doesn't need to be much to be previewed. So
as long as there's actually players left on the team to play, that is.
Well, that is true. That is true. All right, guys, any final thoughts?
No, man, I'm still as eager as ever to watch this team play this week, man. So I say go Gators, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we've been waiting months and months and months to see this, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun regardless of the outcome. And God, it's just great to have college football back again. That is right. College football is back. So remember, have some fun. Have some fun in your orange and blue.
and go Gators. So for Bill, for Will, and Steve Deace from the Michigan Podcast, I'm Dave. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. You can find Bill on Twitter at RealBSykes and Will on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. Thanks for listening to Gators Breakdown.